This morning, there may be some who are here and asking, who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him? There may be some here this morning and you're crying out to Jesus as well. Lord, calm the storm. Lord, aren't you going to do something? Lord, don't you see that I am perishing? Don't you see that I'm about to lose my life? We're about to lose our lives here. Well, this morning, we're going to hear from a woman who has weathered some storms with the power of God in her life. And many of you have gotten to know Cheryl Crowfoot Knapp, over the past couple of years. She and Chuck moved here a few years ago to take care of her mom, Bev Crowfoot, who had Alzheimer's at the time and has since gone to be with the Lord. And a couple of, 6-8 weeks ago, Cheryl shared with me a book she had written about caring for her mom and dad, and it's called Undefeated Innocence, and is a remarkable book. But I'm not here to promote book sales today. I wanted to just encourage Cheryl to come and share with us how God has moved in her life in some struggles, and how she has emerged and continues to give God the glory for that. So at this time, Cheryl, if you would come. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it has been an adventure. I'm coming with the tools of a cold, a raspy voice, my container of water, and a Kleenex. And there had been times where I felt this was going to be more about surrendering, which of course I did to the Lord. It's all up to God. But I come with a voice and prepared to use it. I know how to use it. Let's start the slides. First, I want to tell you Happy Mother's Day. Secondly, yeah, even to you, honey. Secondly, or is it? We'll see if we get the slides. If not, I'll continue without it. Just there's a funny picture on it. Technical issues, it's interesting. There it is. Okay, so Happy Mother's Day. Is it really? Let's go to the next one. So this is what we want to feel like on Mother's Day, empowerment, super mom, super woman. But this is how we sometimes feel, right? Right? So for the last 10 days, I've been fighting a really horrendous cold. I totally lost my voice for about 3 or 4 days. It got so bad I couldn't even talk to myself. Yes, some of you maybe can relate to that. So I took my misery inward, and I decided that I would veg out watching romance movies on Hallmark Channel, and I binge-watched Shark Tank, which my husband said, nobody binge-watches Shark Tank, but I did. So in the process of also listening to radio, and I broke one of the 10 Commandments because I was coveting the voices of the guys on the radio. But all I heard were all of these ads about what I could get Mom for Mother's Day. So let's see what I discovered. Okay, so I could get Mom better sleep with Boll and Branch sheets. I could give Mom money through PayPal. Yes, believe it or not. Flowers from 1-800-Flowers or BooksFlowers.com. Food from Harry and David. Edible arrangements. Letty's. I could give a bucket of chicken from KFC. But nothing says love like jewelry from Jared's, Holly's, or Gregory's, or a personalized candle from Yankee Candle. How about a glorious stand-up mixer from Kmart or Walmart? Clothing from TJ Maxx or JCPenney during Love Mom sales would be stupendous. Of course, there's cards from Hallmark's Signature Collection, or treats from Sherry's Berries, or from Merci Chocolat. And nothing says love like a facial or a massage from either Christopher Kelly locally or Massage Envy. So all these pitches come with telling us we'll do this for Mom because she deserves to be pampered. But everything was tailored with the understanding that we all had moms to pamper. So the reality is my mom no longer needs those things. I will tell you, I love to pamper my mom. When she turned 70, we were still in Minneapolis. Mom was here in Yellville, and I called up Blossom Shop in Yellville, and I said, it's Mom's 70th birthday. Do you just happen to have 70 roses laying around? And they had 70 roses, and batch by batch, vase by vase, they kept coming into Mom's house to totally decorate the house with all the flowers. So I loved to be able to pamper my mom, but now she no longer wants for anything because she went home to be with the Lord and with my dad on June 30th of last year. So being caregivers and guardians for someone through end-stage Alzheimer's has been filled with a lot of storms. I'm going to share some of those with you. But we'll go to the next slide and show you what life looked like for Mom and I back in 2015. Last Mother's Day, we all have appointed and anointed seating, and that's, how dare somebody new to the church come by, and then you kind of give them that evil look like, is this where you really want to sit? But Mom and I and Chuck, it's true, sadly, we're Baptists. Yeah, I know, I'll preach it, brother. But, Mom and Chuck and I, we had our anointed and appointed seats. And last Mother's Day, during part of Tad's sermon talk, as he was giving tributes to moms, and Mom and I turned to each other, and we were holding hands, and had a very tender moment where she told me how terrific of a mom I am to my boys. And I again turned to her, and I said, Mom, you've just been the best mom to me, and I love you like crazy. And so she and I could continue to connect even through the veil of Alzheimer's. But I'm not the only one today that's shed a few tears, and life feels a little bit different. You may have lost a child. You may not be able to conceive a child. Maybe you lost a wife, a daughter, a mom, a sister, a really dear friend, and so Mother's Day doesn't feel the same. Cuisinarts and massages don't mean anything to you. But I'm not new to loss or to storms. I lost my first child in miscarriage, so I'm familiar with that. I've been abused, raped, bullied, on the edge of suicide, and I lost both my parents to Alzheimer's. So I know about the storms, and God has taught me how I can survive the storms. And first, I needed to understand that I could do this by returning to joy. So what's the difference between happiness and joy? And Pastor Tad had touched on that within the last few weeks. But basically, happiness are the things that please you externally. So maybe a real luscious, double-dipped in fudge chocolate cookie with chocolate ice cream and chocolate sauce and chocolate whipped cream. But don't think I like chocolate. That's external joy. It gives you temporary pleasure, and the requirement is something external has to come into you to make you feel good. And it's temporal, it goes away. But true joy is what we have by having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Joy is that which is internal that doesn't change with the storms. So we may not have a happy Mother's Day, but I'm going to share with you some of the storms and how I'm still up here without tears in my eyes. I'm fighting them back, but without tears in my eyes, because I understand that the joy is internal to me because of my relationship with the Lord. So losing my voice, I thought it was kind of humorous too that the main verse is talking about, be quiet. It's like, okay, Lord, I heard you. I've been quiet now for 4 days. This is killing me. When are you going to let me talk again? And of course, Chuck loved it because when he came home from Wisconsin yesterday to be here with me today because he's renovating, and he said, just let me talk for a little while, okay? That's, we did. Sorry, we're the only ones laughing, honey, but we thought it was funny. Okay. Anyway, but in that quietness, I continued to think about, Lord, what do you want to have me share? And I'm going to give you one example of one of the storms, and I'll I'll filter them through. But one of the storms about Mom is Mom worried a lot in the end stage. She was over at Good Sam in the assisted living part of the facility. And she and Dad used to do a lot of camping and had motorhome and just loved to be out in the great outdoors and to camp. So when she'd be sundowning, which would usually start about 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and she would call us if the phone rang, and I'll tell you, I had set it, I can't play it for you, one, because emotionally that probably would put me under, but secondly, I couldn't get my phone to do it, but I had set my ringtone thinking it would help to make me happy. I put it to Pharrell Williams, Happy. And so whenever the happy song rang on my phone, I knew Mom was struggling. So one night she had called up and said, I just don't know what to do. I've got the motorhome here. They're going to kick me out of this place here pretty soon. I don't know where the key is. Do you have the key? Can you help me find the key? You guys got to come over and you got to move this. I'm going to be in trouble. And we always told Mom we weren't going to lie to her ever. But we needed to help her quiet the storm. And so we chose to do that by saying, Mom, we got the key. We'll be over in the morning. Because the one benefit of Alzheimer's, she wouldn't have remembered the conversation. We brought her to peace, we calmed the storm, and we could move on from there. So here's the verse again. It's the Good News translation of being told to be quiet, be still, and let God be God. Caregiving for Mom and being her legal guardians eventually were some tough times for Chuck and me. The storms swirled and our marriage took a hit. Or it took a back seat, I should say. But I tried to allow my internal battles to be fought fully equipped in the armor of God, which He taught me a lot about during the process. But emotionally, I couldn't always stand firm in the storms. But God always promises to be our shelter and our refuge, always. But He allows circumstances to be able to strengthen our reliance upon Him and then be able to reach out and help others. He promises to never leave us in the storms. He says, no, I will not abandon you or leave you as orphans in the storm. I will come to you. And that's a promise that He makes to us. So let's see what a hurricane looks like. I wanted really bad to use an example of a tornado. I've either been in, seen, or run from over a dozen. Rodney, I've speeded in those times. The last one was less than a year ago between Kansas City and Bethany, and I'm looking out that way and I'm going, triangular cloud, and so I'm driving on 35 and I'm checking my phone and radar and going, so I was trying to, feel like my engineer son and trying to figure out the velocity and the trajectory and basically trying to figure out, can I outrun this sucker or what should I do? And so I saw this black truck next to me going about 90, and we had a good race going. I got another Rodney story coming up here too, though. But anyway, so this is a structure of, I'm going to use a hurricane instead. So we're familiar with the eye. What I wasn't aware of is what's called the eye wall. And then we've got the spiral rain bands, which I'll call the cloud gunk. And then we've got shore. Now, so many of you have been wonderful prayer warriors for our family. Some of you were blessed to know both my mom and dad when they were members here together. But you still stood on the shore. You could see there was a storm, but you weren't entered into it the way that we were. You prayed for us, you cried with us, you gave us hope and encouragement. So a shore is a good, safe place to be at. But in Alzheimer's, we were in the cloud gunk or in the eye. When Mom was sundowning, she would be in that swirl of the cloud gunks, where life totally was illogical to her. Now, most of you saw Mom, those of you who would see Mom here at church on Sunday mornings. Well, that's mornings. That's not sundowning time for Mom. So she could kind of either fake her way through and then nudge me, who is that again? We had her on a prescription that enabled her to continue to keep talking, but she was still never on shore. It was during those times when she wasn't sundowning that she was in the eye. But what came to me this week, and I've used this example before, but the eye wall is the most important, and I hadn't realized it before. The eye wall is Jesus himself holding back the full fury of the storm. So when he promises to never abandon us, that's because Jesus himself is holding back the surge of the cloud gunk, those spiral rain bands, saying, for right now, abide with me in the eye of the storm. But sundowning, the spiral rain bands, you on the shore, you still couldn't see. You can't see inside the rain bands, and you can't see all the way into the eye of the storm. You could see that things were swirling, and we appreciate each and every one of your prayers and tears and hugs along the journey. I almost never take notes, but with my cold, I'm trying to anyway. I will tell you Mom and I, we physically weathered. So I will tell you one tornado story, though, about Mom and I. So I was living up Coon Rapids, Mom and Dad in Minnesota, and Mom and Dad hadn't moved down here yet. And I figured Mom was probably home, and I was by myself, and lived in a manor home just on a concrete slab, no basement. And there's some nice tornado warnings and wall clouds going on, and I thought, close your ears again, Rodney. I thought, okay, I've only got to get 5 miles to get to the house that I grew up that has a basement. If Mom's not home, doesn't matter, I got a key. So I get in my car, I'm driving about 90 miles an hour in a 60 mile an hour. It's kind of my MO, unfortunately. But I'm driving, and I'm seeing about 3 or 4 little, fingers coming down from the wall cloud. And so then we lived on a road with 3 cul-de-sacs, and we lived in the first one. Not like this helps you understand, but we were right here. And so I turned down the main road and then quick left into the cul-de-sac, and the garage door is opening up. And I thought, where's Mom going now? And so I get into the drive, and I said, Mom, where are you going? We're in a tornado warning. She said, I knew you were coming. I never called her. So anyway, so we got into the basement and hung out there for about 3 hours. But her worst storm was just before she passed, and the way that I begged God to let her go home. For years, Mom had talked about that she thought she would probably pass in the month of June. She lost both her mother and her brother in the month of June, and so she told me 15, 20 years ago that she figured she'd go in June. So on June 29th, as she laid over at Baxter, she had already broken her hip and broken her leg in about 3 or 4 places, had surgery, blood clots, and now things were happening. Her blood ox wouldn't get above 90. It got to about 88, and they couldn't get it above that, but I went home. And so I got home, and I shook my fist. It's okay to do that. But I shook my fist at God, and I said, it's June 29th. Tomorrow's June 30th. It would be a really good day for Mom to go home so that she doesn't have to hurt anymore. And I said, Lord, let her be free. Unbeknownst to me, a very dear friend of mine, God was filling her in on his plan. We compared notes later. But around all morning on June 30th, I started getting phone calls from the hospital. And finally, I got the call where they were moving her to the emergency room. They weren't sure what they had to end up doing, but they moved her to the emergency room. And so I just knew. So Chuck was up north, and I called Chuck, and I said, please call over to church. I can't do this by myself. And I thought that was so profound. By myself. Do what by myself? Okay, I got it, Lord. I understand. So Kevin and Nicole rescued me. They were crossing the crosswalk at the same time. But before I got to the hospital, I was driving, and I've got this in the book. I was driving like Jeff Gordon, careening through the hills of the Ozarks, and I kept thinking, okay, well, if I'm going about 70-ish, 75-ish through Gassville, maybe I'll run into Rodney and he'd give me an escort. But when I was in the car, I was calling out to God because I'd never been with anyone when they passed before. So for a year, I had been just calling out to God, laying it before Him, saying, I'm really afraid. But I know that I need to be with Mom when that time comes. So here I am careening through the hills like Jeff Gordon and knowing, okay, this is the time, and what now if I miss it? So now I'm calling out to God and I'm saying, you gave me the ability to understand that I can do this with Mom when she goes to be with you. Don't take her till I get there. And when we got there and the doctor came in and wanted a directive, that's when her heart had stopped. And so God did graciously allow me to be with her when her spirit passed and went to be with the Lord. So Jesus protects through the storms. How can we respond to these storms? And one word, through peace. Let's go to the next one. That I take from Romans 15:13. Say, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in Him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. And that enables us to be able to have peace in the storms. Now, what's the practical thought? How do we achieve that peace? 3 ways. But it's through grace. We'll go to the next. Okay, I'm a little ahead of myself. Steve, keep it there. How we get through the storms is by having peace. And I must have missed a slide. Doesn't really matter. Okay, it's okay. Go ahead with the peace. But it's grace. That grace teaches us how, that was earlier. So grace teaches us how to have peace in the storms. I'm sorry. And how we do that is by having peace with, peace from, and peace in. And I'm going to give you several examples of that, including reading just a few excerpts from the book. But what he taught me, this is sort of a journal, of the Alzheimer's journey that we had. But it started because I called out to God and I said, what does your word say about Alzheimer's? Your word promises to be the inerrant word of God. So somewhere in there you must talk about Alzheimer's. And he led me to the Beatitudes and the fruit of the Spirit. And I did a very intense study of the Beatitudes and fruit of the Spirit so that I could understand that the Beatitudes are instruction to me on how I'm supposed to have a vertical relationship with God. And that by having the vertical relationship with God, then the fruit of the Spirit is my horizontal relationship virtues that I can pour out to Mom, to who I'm caring for. So the book is about biblical truth and personal anecdotes. But he taught me so much through the process. So peace with, I broke down into 4 different categories. One, first, that we have to be able to have peace with God. In order to weather the storms, we have to be able to have peace with God. God never causes bad things to happen, but He allows them for His purpose when it serves His purpose, and that's usually to be able to conform ourselves more to Him and to teach us how to trust Him. So peace with God starts with a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And so from the book I read, peace with God starts with a personal relationship with Christ, and then stepping aside and allowing Him to be in control of the details of our lives. This can be difficult for anyone still impacted by deep internal wounds from the past. For example, those who are abused or abandoned by an earthly father may falsely assume that God will abuse and abandon them too, rather than display His unconditional love for them. Or those who have been labeled a failure by themselves or others might be mistakenly convinced that they're also a failure in God's eyes. But God knew me before I was born. He knew I would sin and fall short. He knew I could never attain perfection on my own. But I asked God to forgive me. He never promised to make my life perfect, but He did promise to accept me as perfect because of Jesus. So in order to weather the storms, we have to first have peace with God. Secondly, I had to find peace with me. My life wound is failure. I have felt, I describe a life wound as something that just keeps holding me back, that kind of keeps coming back. If anyone calls me a failure, that can just put me to a puddle, because I don't think it really has to do with my perfectionistic tendency, but I didn't want to be a failure to my parents. I didn't want to be a failure to my friends. I didn't want to be a failure with God. But yet, I kept allowing either others or myself to label me that way. And that's what brought me nearly to the brink of suicide when I was 18 years old, because I felt I had failed everybody. So once I was able allow myself to not feel like a failure, then I could have peace with myself. So I wrote in the book as well, I said, for years I felt like I was a failure. I assumed God didn't need me and certainly must be disappointed in me. Looking at life through a living room window was lonely. The rape was a painful reality of the culmination of my bad choices. My life was far from perfect, and since God is perfect, how on earth could he ever want me or need me? Because God only wants perfect people, right? Wrong. Through Jesus Christ, he was able to allow me to see myself as he sees me, which means I'm not a failure. So peace with God, peace with me, and peace with others is next. The very short version of a very long story is I talk a lot about Joseph in the book. Families who care for loved ones with Alzheimer's usually experience a lot of division in their families for a lot of different reasons. There's a lot of division in Joseph's family, to the point where the brothers threw him in a pit, wanted to leave him for dead, sold him to merchants. Joseph became a slave, and he just kept having these stumbling blocks put in front of him. But in the end, when Joseph was in power in Egypt and his brothers came to him, Joseph knew who they were, but they didn't know who Joseph was. But they got down on their knees and they begged him for food. And through that, I started to really decipher, and through Sunday school and sermons, that the two components of reconciliation are humility and forgiveness. Now, maybe one party to the relationship has a bigger burden in one area than the other area, but they both have to coexist, and both people in a relationship need to humbly seek forgiveness with each other. Now, my sister and I had been fractured for many, many decades and years. And I got to the point where I didn't even know if that could be reconciled, and I said, Lord, change my heart. I can't change my heart, but I know you can. I'm open to it. Work in me. God was working on her too. And so I will tell you, truly in a flash, one hug, it was gone. We humbly sought each other, forgave each other, didn't even have to talk about any specifics, but we were able to humbly forgive. And now we send loving emoticons to each other and long strings on our cell phones. But I'm so very, very grateful, because that was the one fractured relationship that I needed peace with. So to weather the storms, I now have peace with God, peace with me, peace with my best friend and sister. But lastly, I learned to be able to find peace with Alzheimer's. Mom didn't do the things that Mom did because she was trying to frustrate us. It was the disease. Dad didn't try to abuse my mom and physically leave bruises on her arms when he was doing battle. It was the disease. And so a disease is a disease, and the ultimate result of any disease is freedom. We weather the storm of the disease and we go home and celebrate on streets of gold. And real brief about, so that's peace with, peace from and peace in. God can choose to totally release us. Like when he gave Moses the power to part the Red Sea and allow the people to go through without one being injured or killed. That's having peace from. But most of the time, God will give us peace in. And the example that I use is Daniel going in. Daniel was duped, okay? He was framed. And so he ultimately had to go into the lion's den. But God surrounded him and gave him peace in the fire of the den. So we can find peace in the storms. Alzheimer's is a difficult disease. I will tell you that there's increased risk of suicide for those who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's, especially in the early stages. We personally lost a friend to suicide shortly after a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. Secondly, there was a study in 2013 of 120 caregivers, which is a small amount, but it still showed that 8% of caregivers are at high risk for suicide. The actual statistic was 26% of them contemplated, and out of that 26%, 30% of them said that they were most likely to commit suicide because they couldn't weather the storm. So if we can find peace with, peace from, and/or peace in the storm, then we're able to walk through the situations that we find ourselves in. I'm going to give you one more mom story. I'm not sure how to, it says 10:11. Oh, because that's the actual time, not how long I've been talking for. Okay, so, hey, you told me to speak. I'm trying to speak. Anyway, but no, it wasn't about me speaking. That's why God told me to be quiet. It was about him needing to speak. So I'll give you just a couple of the lowlights, and I'll close. I recently was able to have a TV interview with Craig O'Neill at KTHV TV. And one of the stories that I told is Chuck and I were getting ready to watch the movie God Is Not Dead. And my phone rang. Pharrell was singing and happy, happy, happy. And I'm going, okay, I'm not. And so then Mom said, I always answer the phone, hi, Mom, this is your daughter, Cheryl. My daughter, Cheryl? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, could you tell me who my daughters are? And I said, well, I'm your daughter, Cheryl, and your other daughter is Lori. Well, how old are they? I'm sorry, she asked, well, where are they? Who are my young daughters? Where are my young daughters? And I said, well, I'm your youngest daughter. I'm 58. I live here in Yaleville. This is your daughter, Cheryl. And so we continued to talk for a little bit. And then she said, and what was your name again? And it was that first moment that I knew that Mom wasn't exactly sure who I was. So then we proceed to turn on God Is Not Dead. And one of the very first scenes in the movie, Nicole is shaking her head, is where a daughter and her mother are in the kitchen. And her mother has early Alzheimer's and turns to the daughter and said, what's your name again? It's like, not an easy storm, Lord. It was bad enough seeing it in my own life and seeing it in someone else's. The only other story I'll share is when we were up in Minnesota trying to celebrate Christmas with our kids, and the sundowning call comes, and Mom was really irate and upset. She was going to go to the seniors' Christmas banquet and says, no, I don't want to go. My family is never around. They never call. They never visit. My friends are here. But I'm not going to go. Oh, how come, Mom? Oh, again, nobody even cares. She says, what am I doing here anyway? And I said, well, you live in Arkansas. And she said, well, but I don't know why I'm alive. Why aren't I dead? Today's the day that I'm supposed to be dead. And all I could do is take a deep breath and a silent prayer to the Lord and say, help me walk through this one for Mom. So I went. We were with my stepdaughter and her family, her young children. And I went into their bedroom and just closed the door and talked to Mom off the mountaintop. Got Mom at least into the eye of the storm. So I want to share this final picture with you, that Mom was the first to hold me, and God graciously allowed me to be the last one to hold her. That was Mom holding me in the hospital. And on Mom's 80th birthday, we gave her quite a rousing birthday, and sang her happy birthday, and she thanked us with a bow. So we can't always see God. We can't always see the storms that other people are going through. But we always have the promise that His grace is sufficient for whatever we find ourselves going through. But what I did find, and we'll get to the last slide now. Oh, Yeah, we love to kiss Mom. So Mom and Dad, my sister and I, and Chuck and my mom. But finally, no, not quite. So that's the cover of my book. I wrote because I caregave. If you've been a caregiver, that's an honor to you, because you're the ones holding the hand, stroking the face, kissing the lips, and working through the pain. And so instead of Happy Mother's Day, it may not be happy. And yes, that's me, the little one on the lap. It may not always be happy, but because of Jesus, it will always be richly blessed. So have a blessed Mother's Day.